Hey there, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the story of an empire so massive, so incredibly powerful, that its shadow literally still shapes the world we live in today. I mean, from the coffee in your cup to the borders on our modern maps, we're talking about the Ottoman Empire. We're going to look at a state that connected entire continents, practically controlled global trade, and influenced human history in some deeply profound ways.
Okay, let's dive right into this with a number, 623. Just hold that number in your head for a second. That is the exact amount of years this massive entity lasted. Think about that for a moment. From knights riding around in shining armor all the way to biplanes flying in World War I, this single, continuous political machine survived it all. It's a truly staggering timeline of human history, all packed into one unified state.
So, here is our roadmap for today. 1. Birth and early expansion. 2. The Golden Age dawns. 3. Life within the empire. 4. The long decline. 5. World War I and collapse. And finally, 6. The Ottoman legacy.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, Birth and Early Expansion, the Rise of Osman I.
So, the year is 1299, and we find ourselves in Anatolia, which is basically the region that makes up most of modern-day Turkey. Now, this massive empire obviously didn't start out as a global superpower. It actually began with just a single, pretty small Anatolian tribe led by a really visionary leader named Osman I. But, as you might guess, they didn't stay a small tribe for very long. Following their founding in 1299, the 1300s saw this incredibly rapid military expansion. They basically grew from scattered medieval villages into a serious regional power, heavily utilizing these highly mobile early soldiers and some really formidable cavalry. By the time the 1400s rolled around, this localized force had transformed into a sweeping military machine, embarking on these massive conquests that eventually stretched across huge chunks of Europe, Asia, and Africa.
That brings us to Section 2, the Golden Age dawns, Constantinople and beyond.
Because you see, the Ottomans weren't just casually expanding. They were setting their sights on the ultimate prize of the medieval world. They wanted global supremacy. Which leads us to a really fascinating problem. How exactly do you breach an impregnable city? We're talking about Constantinople here, the absolute crown jewel and capital of the Byzantine Empire. For centuries, its legendary massive stone walls were considered completely unbreakable. I mean, invading armies had tried and failed for literally hundreds of years. So how on earth did the Ottomans finally pull it off in 1453?
Well, the answer comes down to revolutionary technology and just sheer unadulterated ambition. Sultan Mehmed II, who, by the way, was only 21 years old at the time, unleashed a terrifying new weapon, custom-built siege cannons. Some of these bronze monsters were over 27 feet long. They required 60 oxen just to drag them to the battlefield. And in 1453, they literally shattered the 1,000-year-old walls of Constantinople. Mehmed II rode into the city, claimed the magnificent Hagia Sophia, and instantly transformed the Ottoman state from a regional power into a truly global, intercontinental empire.
Securing Constantinople really ushered in a true golden age. Under Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, this was no longer just a story about military conquest. It was a total cultural explosion. We start seeing an unprecedented expansion of these highly lucrative trade routes that enrich the empire beyond measure. We see monumental, just breathtaking architecture rising up, like the sprawling Topkapi Palace, and these grand, majestic mosques that still dominate skylines today. And we see a genuine flourishing of science, poetry, and law. Under Suleiman, the Ottoman Empire was arguably the most powerful and sophisticated state on Earth.
Let's move on to Section 3, Life within the Empire, Society and Structure.
Because it's absolutely vital to understand how they managed millions of citizens across wildly diverse geographies and cultures on a day-to-day basis. At the very core of their power were the Janissaries. These guys were elite infantry units. Originally, they were composed of young Christian boys who were conscripted, converted to Islam, and raised for one sole purpose: serving the Sultan. They became the fiercest, most disciplined, and frankly, deeply feared infantry anywhere in the world. As the Sultan's personal bodyguards and the total military backbone of the empire, the Janissaries were the undisputed key to maintaining Ottoman dominance on the battlefield for centuries.
But hey, you can't run an empire on swords alone, right? The Ottomans built rigorous centers of education where scholars meticulously preserved and actually advanced scientific and philosophical knowledge. They also used this brilliant system of religious administration that allowed wildly diverse communities a degree of self-rule, which ensured massive internal stability. Throw in the bustling bazaars, these vibrant economic hubs connecting Asian spices directly to European buyers, and you got an incredibly complex, thriving society where daily life was deeply intertwined with religion, trade, and military readiness. Which brings us to Section 4, the long decline, losing the edge. No golden age lasts forever. The fall of this superpower wasn't some sudden, overnight event. It was a slow, agonizing unraveling over centuries. We can kind of break this complex decline down by looking at the tension between internal rot and external threats. Internally, the empire started suffering from widespread administrative corruption, a stagnant economy that just failed to industrialize, and a string of really painful military defeats. Even the Janissaries, who were once their greatest asset, eventually became this conservative political force that actively resisted necessary modernization. And externally, well, they faced a rapidly changing world. European powers were experiencing the scientific and industrial revolutions. This resulted in fierce military competition, shifting global trade routes that entirely bypassed Ottoman lands, and aggressive rival empires that just started picking off Ottoman territories one by one.
Next up is Section 5, World War I and Collapse, the final blow.
So the 20th century arrives, and it delivers the fatal strike to an already fracturing state. In 1914, the Ottoman Empire made a fateful decision to enter the catastrophic global conflict of World War I. Aligning with the Central Powers, the empire found itself fighting a brutal, multi-front war that it was neither economically nor militarily prepared to sustain. The consequences were just absolutely devastating for its soldiers and civilians alike. We're talking massive casualties, widespread suffering, and ultimately sealing the tragic fate of the empire.
Honestly, the writing was on the wall at this point. The late 19th century had already brought escalating economic dependency and major territorial losses. This was followed incredibly closely by the outright devastation of World War I, from 1914 to 1918, which completely shattered the military and resulted in the Allied occupation of the empire's capital. Finally, in 1922, the Sultanate was officially abolished. The final Sultan departed, and after 623 years, the Ottoman Empire totally and completely collapsed.
But let's look at Section 6, the Ottoman legacy, a world transformed.
Because the story doesn't just end in ruins. From the literal ashes of this defeated empire, a brilliant military commander named Mustafa Kemal Atatürk emerged. He led a highly successful war of independence, firmly rejected the harsh terms imposed by the victorious powers of World War I, and established the modern Republic of Turkey. He initiated these sweeping, radical reforms to modernize and secularize the new nation, permanently closing the book on the Sultanate, but opening an incredibly vibrant new chapter for the Turkish people. And that right there is exactly why this history is so profoundly relevant to us today. The lasting impact of the Ottoman Empire is everywhere. When you look at a map of the Middle East and Eastern Europe, those modern geopolitical boundaries were largely shaped by the empire's rise and fall. They left behind enduring architectural marvels that still define major cities across 3 continents. They deeply embedded rich cultural, culinary, and religious traditions that are practiced by millions today. And remarkably, their historical grip on global trade routes actually forced European explorers to seek out new paths to Asia by sea, which inadvertently kicked off the entire age of discovery.
So what does this all mean? History isn't just about the past, right? It's the blueprint for our present. The fall of such a monumental empire really forces us to ask, what makes a society truly resilient in the face of a rapidly changing world? When a 600-year-old superpower can collapse, what does that mean for the superpowers of today? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Be sure to subscribe to HistoryTube for more deep dives, and we'll see you next time.